In October 1959, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, located on Alcatraz Island, about 2.4 kilometers from the San Francisco shore, was holding 260 inmates considered the most dangerous in America. This was the 25th year since the prison opened in 1934, and names like Alvin Karpis and Mickey Cohen had made it a symbol of brutal discipline. Every day, prisoners woke at 5 a.m., lined up for count in C Block, ate lunch in Dining Hall A, under constant watch from guards in Observation Tower number 3, and anyone violating rules was sent straight to D Block, the frigid isolation unit. Among the hundreds locked on that rock was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. At 54, he was in his 7th year of a 15-year sentence. Before prison, he had been called the King of Harlem, a man who ran things, negotiated, and handled conflicts with brains more than violence. Black inmates at Alcatraz saw him as a spiritual anchor. Marcus Williams, who arrived in 1958, once recalled, "In the yard, everybody looked to him before daring to step into trouble. Bumpy saw things coming before they happened. That was why, from 1953 to 1959, Alcatraz rarely saw major incidents involving black inmates. Bumpy's status was enough to maintain a balance many quietly relied on to survive. That balance shifted on October 7, 1959, when Orville Heavy Crockett was transferred from USP Atlanta to the island. He was 38, big and tall, notorious for violence, and carrying extreme racial hatred. Federal records noted at least 3 assaults by him on black inmates at other facilities. An Alcatraz guard at the time, R. McLean, wrote in a report, "Crockett isn't like regular hotheads. He picks a target, watches, then acts." From his first week in the lower yard, Crockett paid special attention to Bumpy. He was irritated seeing a black man receive respect from all of A Block and part of the yard. Some white inmates, said Crockett told them privately, "I'm gonna break that halo of his. Let's see if those black guys still dare hold their heads up." And then the fateful event happened. One day in October, around 12:15 in Dining Hall A, amid the clatter of metal trays hitting tables, Crockett approached the table where Bumpy was sitting. In front of dozens of inmates, he growled, "Sit down, boy." Black, white, and Latin inmates all heard every word clearly. Williams recalled, "The whole mess hall froze. Only the sound of a spoon hitting the floor remained." What many didn't expect was Bumpy's reaction. He gave a slight smile. No one in the dining room that day fully understood the meaning of that smile. But just 2 days later, on the noon of October 23, 1959, Orville Heavy Crockett would lose one eye for saying those words, and Alcatraz would etch the name Bumpy Johnson in a way even the boldest would never forget. Orville Heavy Crockett first appeared in federal records in 1951. He was 38 when transferred to Alcatraz in 1959, weighing about 250 pounds, nearly 6 feet tall, and known as one of the most violent and extreme white inmates ever to pass through the federal prison system. Crockett was born in the Texas Panhandle, where racial conflicts in the 1940s, 1950s were documented in multiple U.S. Department of Justice reports. According to FBI files, he had shown violent behavior since his 20s, but truly became dangerous after 2 murders in Amarillo between 1954 and 1956. Both victims were black men. One was shot 3 times in the back in a bottling plant parking lot. The other happened in a suburban bar. When asked in court on March 12, 1956, if he felt remorse, Crockett gave an answer that silenced the courtroom. "Killin' a Negro ain't murder, it's cleanin' the land." That statement was recorded by court clerk Helen Murray and forwarded to the Department of Justice. After conviction, he was sent to USP Atlanta, where internal records noted at least 7 assaults on black and Latin inmates in just 18 months. A Latin inmate named Javier Molina, who witnessed a 1957-yard beating, testified in the investigation. He doesn't hit to win, he hits to terrorize. But what troubled the wardens was that Crockett always knew exactly where the line was to avoid long-term isolation. He never acted where a supervisor was present, left no direct witnesses, and often made his followers do the dirty work. According to Supervising Officer George Reed at USP Atlanta on October 14, 1957, Crockett knows the prison rules and exploits every loophole. If he beats someone, he does it in a blind spot, right when the camera is turned away. He understands procedure better than new guards. That blend of brutality and calculation forced the federal system to transfer him to McNeil Island in Washington state in 1958, hoping greater isolation would reduce his danger level. But McNeil Island records showed the opposite. In 14 months, Crockett was involved in 4 racially motivated assaults. A guard named Arthur Klein wrote in a report on April 9, 1959. He fears no one. The only thing he respects is raw power. When McNeil couldn't control him either, the federal board decided to send him to what was considered the end of the line for all dangerous inmates, Alcatraz. On October 7, 1959, Crockett set foot on the island. He seemed pleased to be transferred to a place that had held notorious criminals like Mickey Cohen and Alvin Karpis. According to receiving officer Frank Walters, who was on duty when Crockett arrived, he stepped off the boat like he was entering an arena, not a trace of fear. The first thing Crockett did was survey the yard, especially the intersection of walkways called Times Square. There he first saw Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, Marcus Williams, the black inmate, who arrived at Alcatraz in 1958, recalled, "I was standing right near him when he spotted Bumpy. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone picking a target." Crockett's reason for targeting Bumpy was clear. In the Alcatraz yard, where every relationship rested on power and respect, Bumpy was the only one inmates of multiple races quietly followed. Latin inmates yielded the path for him. Many older white inmates kept their distance. Black inmates saw him as their backbone. His silence carried a weight Crockett couldn't stand. Crockett once told a white inmate, Charlie Humes, who later testified in the investigation, "I ain't letting a black guy get looked at with more respect than me." For Crockett, toppling Bumpy's position wasn't just violence, it was his chance to become the yard's ruler. He believed humiliating the old Harlem man in front of inmates from A Block and B Block would make every black man on Alcatraz bow. Alcatraz in 1959 was still a place where racism seeped into every cell block, even if it was never written in official rules. Crockett understood that and saw himself on a mission to reset the order. In his first week, he constantly watched Bumpy, how he walked, how inmates reacted when he appeared, how he stayed calm in every situation, and he concluded, to take the yard, he needed one thing: humiliate Bumpy Johnson in front of as many people as possible. From the moment Crockett saw Bumpy in Times Square, the confrontation had begun. The chain of events began just days after Orville Heavy. On October 10, 1959, around 12:20 in Dining Hall A, amid hundreds of inmates lining up for lunch, Crockett walked past Bumpy Johnson's table, snatched an apple pie slice from his tray, and ate it right in front of him as a blatant provocation. Leonard Briggs, a black inmate sitting at the same table that day, testified in the investigation. We all held our breath. He just looked at him, a short look like he was logging more data. No one understood why he didn't react. The second incident happened 3 days later, the morning of October 13th, in the C-block shower area. Crockett came up from behind, slammed into Bumpy hard enough to make him pause, then said clearly enough for those around to hear, "The faucet's for white men. This faucet is for white men." Rafael Munoz, a Latin inmate who witnessed it, testified. Mr. Johnson straightened up, looked at him for a few seconds, then went back to what he was doing. I saw a flash of satisfaction in Crockett's eyes, like he'd just measured the reaction he wanted. The third event took place on October 16th, at Times Square, the Yard intersection, where inmates moved between blocks. Crockett stepped out and blocked the path, just as Bumpy turned into the corridor. The inmates standing around knew exactly what was happening. Peter Langston, a white inmate, recalled, "I was standing not far away. I saw Crockett plant himself right in the middle of the walkway. Mr. Johnson watched him, stepped to the left, and kept going. Crockett turned and watched with a smug look. For someone like Crockett, 3 straight provocations without a reaction only reinforced his belief that he had found the right weakness. He told his crew in the yard that same afternoon, according to Charlie Hume's later testimony, "I told you that Harlem guys got nothing left, just an old man who knows how to bow." For black inmates, though, it was completely different. They knew that from Bates Avenue in Harlem to the numbers joints and all the way to Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson had never bowed to anyone. His calm had only one reason: he was calculating. Marcus Williams, who had heard stories of Harlem gang wars, said, "When he goes quiet, it means he's waiting for the other guy to make a mistake." The fourth event was the turning point. On October 18th, around 3 p.m., in the lower yard, Crockett gathered 4 of his followers, stood in the middle of the yard, and stared straight at Bumpy as he approached. When he was about 20 steps away, Crockett shouted loudly, "Sit down, boy," then switched to racial slang meant to degrade. "Sit down, nigger." Cliff Hayes, a black inmate who saw it, testified in a voice still shaking as he remembered. The whole yard turned. "I'd never heard anyone talk to Mr. Johnson like that." What many didn't know was that very evening, in Cella Block, Bumpy made his first statement since Crockett began provoking him. Marcus Williams quoted it exactly. "He spoke low, but everyone heard clear. He thinks I'm scared. Good. Let him think that. Let him tie the noose around his own neck. When he crosses the line one more time, I'll end it all." That was the only time that week he spoke about Crockett. Everything he did was keep watching. That silence wasn't acceptance, it was a trap. In places like Alcatraz, violence isn't carried out recklessly. To strike without being seen as the aggressor, you wait for the perfect moment, where there are witnesses, where the other guy is clearly the instigator, where any response is viewed as self-defense. And Crockett, with his characteristic arrogance, was putting himself in the perfect position to be dealt with. He didn't realize it. On the contrary, he believed Bumpy's silence was a sign of fear. James Stutter, a white inmate who heard him brag, testified. He said he'd humiliate Mr. Johnson in front of the whole yard. He even said, "I'll show those black guys who's boss." But what Crockett didn't understand was that Bumpy Johnson didn't play the weak man's game. He played the game of someone who had lived in Harlem full of traps, waiting for the opponent to open the door himself. His silence was a classic strategy to let Crockett freely escalate to the point of no return. When Crockett shouted, "Sit down, boy," in front of dozens of people, he had crossed the boundary Bumpy had been waiting for. And as Marcus Williams said about that moment, The second he said it, Bumpy wasn't just watching anymore. He had decided. Now he was only waiting for the timing. In the Alcatraz yard, at the end of October 1959, many inmates felt something they couldn't put into words. The air was tightening day by day, action by action, insult by insult, and at the center of it was a 38-year-old man who thought he was winning, and a 54-year-old man, smiling in silence, waiting for the moment to end it all in the most absolute way. Noon, on October 23, 1959, Dining Hall A at Alcatraz was packed with about 240 inmates lining up to receive trays and sitting at their assigned numbered spots. On the north platform were 4 guards, on the south, 3 more. The remaining 3 positions at the room's corners and entry corridors. Each had a motionless guard, eyes tracking every movement. 12 in total, enough to spot any unusual behavior in seconds. But that morning, though everything followed routine, no one in the room could escape the spreading tension like cold air leaking from the iron doors. That atmosphere had started days earlier when Orville Heavy Crockett repeatedly provoked Bumpy Johnson in the yard, showers, and on the way to the mess hall. Black inmates scattered throughout the room, all sensed that today's lunch wasn't like any other. A Latin man near the door wrote in his post-incident statement, "No one said it out loud, but we knew something was coming. That kind of air doesn't lie." Bumpy Johnson entered the dining hall at 12:13. He held his tray calmly, walked straight to table 42, where he had sat for 7 years. He didn't look around, but every inmate present noticed every step he took. The silence carried a feeling as if the entire room was waiting for a signal from that 54-year-old black man. 2 minutes later, the east door of dining hall opened, and Crockett appeared, walking fast, shoulder-checking an inmate near the path, so his tray nearly fell. No one dared complain. Crockett crossed the room like everyone was air. He didn't go to his own table, though every inmate had a strictly assigned spot. He went straight to the table where Bumpy was sitting. Many inmates stopped eating. Some bowed their heads, others sneaked glances at the guards to see how they would react. But not one of the 12 on the platforms or observation posts moved. It happened too fast, but for those who knew how to watch, it was the sign. The guards had felt the tension all week, and now they stood still waiting for something to happen. Crockett pulled out the chair across from Bumpy and sat down, slamming his tray on the table so the sound echoed off the solid concrete walls. He looked around, as if making sure everyone saw where he was and who he was facing, then turned forward. He spoke loud enough to cut through the sound of hundreds of knives and forks hitting metal trays. "Sit down, boy," a black inmate at table 38 said. I heard every word, like he shouted it right behind my ear. The room had no more spoons, no knives, no heavy breathing. Just that sentence. Right at that moment, Bumpy Johnson looked up. No inmate in that room that day ever forgot the moment. He didn't look angry, didn't tremble or show fear. He just looked at Crockett, and then he smiled. A small smile, as if he had just confirmed what he had waited a whole week for. Crockett had walked right into the trap he didn't know existed. Bumpy set his fork down gently, as if finishing a normal meal. Then he stood up, slowly but sharp like a blade. Inmate Marcus Williams recalled. He stood up, but after that, everything happened so fast I couldn't believe my eyes. As Bumpy stood straight, his right hand subtly moved to the fold of his shirt at the side. A small motion so slight, many later swore they didn't see it. A thin metal object, about 4 inches long, appeared between his fingers. A shank, sharpened from scrap metal from the workshop, hidden so well even the guard team hadn't found it during surprise checks. Bumpy took exactly one step forward. The distance between him and Crockett was about an arm's length. From the moment the shank appeared to the end of the 2 slashes, the entire thing took less than 3 seconds. First slash, horizontal from left to right, carving a long line from Crockett's left cheekbone to near his right ear. Blood sprayed instantly. Second slash, diagonal from bottom to top, slicing across the eyelid and straight into Crockett's right eye. The eye burst in that instant, leaving a thick black stream of blood running down his cheek. He had no time to react, no time to raise a hand to defend. He fell backward off the chair, tray flying to the floor with a sharp clatter. An inmate sitting nearby testified. I only saw his hand move twice. After that, Crockett wasn't himself anymore. A second after the second slash, the entire dining hall exploded. Inmates screamed. Some slid under tables to avoid getting pulled in. Guards blew whistles frantically. Down, down. Commands rang from 3 different directions. Bumpy Johnson didn't run, didn't back away, didn't try to dodge the guards. He simply dropped the knife to the floor, hands hanging loose at his sides, eyes fixed on Crockett writhing on the concrete. A large drop of blood from Crockett's face fell, then a long stream flowed around his head. One of the guards who ran up later said, "I've never seen so much blood, and the man who caused it so calm." When 3 guards rushed to subdue him, Bumpy never took his eyes off Crockett. Then he spoke the words. Many call the final verdict, later becoming part of Alcatraz lore, passed through the entire federal prison system. Touch one of my brothers again. Next time you won't see a doctor, you'll see God. After those words, the guards cuffed him, dragged him out of dining hall amid the chaos of screams, yells, and calls for medics. Crockett lay there, face covered in blood, right eye gone, breathing ragged, his aggression and arrogance reduced to the dark red streaks spread across the cold concrete floor. That noon, in less than 5 seconds, Alcatraz's order changed forever. No one in that dining room could ever forget the sight, and from that day on, no inmate ever dared take Bumpy Johnson's smile lightly again. Right after Bumpy Johnson dropped the knife to the floor and was subdued by 3 guards, the entire dining hall instantly became a chaotic battlefield. Crockett lay motionless on the concrete, blood from the 2 slashes running down his neck, soaking into his gray prison shirt. A guard shouted loudly for the medical team, and less than a minute later, a stretcher from the infirmary was wheeled in. Alcatraz's duty doctor that day, Dr. Harold McKay, examined the wounds on site and later wrote in his report, "Inmate Orville Crockett's right eye is completely destroyed, unsalvageable." Crockett was taken out of the dining room, groaning in pain, one hand covering his face, blood still pouring steadily beneath his fingers. As the stretcher passed, many Black and Latin inmates watched with an eerie calm. They didn't cheer openly, didn't get excited, but there was a silent acknowledgement. They understood why it happened. Marcus Williams, housed in C Block, said years later, "No one said it out loud, but we knew Mr. Johnson didn't attack for himself. He did it for all of us." While Crockett was wheeled to the infirmary, Bumpy Johnson was pulled out the opposite way, but he didn't resist, didn't say a word. He just walked between 2 guards, head slightly bowed, eyes still sharp as the blade he had just used to tear his enemy's face. One guard wrote in an internal report. He was silent as stone. No one could guess what he was thinking. That very evening, Warden Blackwell ordered an urgent internal investigation. Alcatraz's disciplinary office stayed lit until 3 a.m., more than 30 inmates from tables in Dining Hall A, along with the 7 guards on duty that noon, were called in for questioning. The results surprised and reluctantly forced the prison leadership to admit a reality. Crockett was the aggressor, repeatedly and systematically. The testimonies matched terrifyingly. An inmate from B Block stated, 3 days earlier, he snatched the apple pie from Mr. Johnson's tray and ate it right in front of him. Rafael Munoz, who witnessed the shower incident, said, he shoved him so hard, he nearly fell. It wasn't accidental. Inmate Peter Langston confirmed Crockett blocking the path at Times Square. No mistake, he stood there waiting for him. And Clifford Hayes, who saw the final event in the lower yard, put it simply. He shouted, "Sit down, boy," in front of dozens of people. Everyone heard it clear. Each statement was recorded, and when placed together in a 17-page summary, they turned the attack from an unprovoked act of violence into a response considered in the context of serious, ongoing provocation. Internal investigator Albert Rooney wrote, Crockett repeatedly used racially derogatory language, engaged in threatening and provocative behavior over multiple days. Johnson maintained a peaceful demeanor until the other party crossed the line in a crowded area. However, because Bumpy used force causing severe injury, he still had to face punishment per regulations. On October 24, 1959, at exactly 10 a.m., the official decision was issued. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was sent to D Block, solitary confinement, for 30 days on 2 charges, possession of an unauthorized weapon and causing serious bodily injury. His transfer to the hole was carried out in silence. Inmates lined along the walkway said nothing, but their eyes followed him like seeing a soldier off to battle. No one objected. No one was afraid. Only pure respect. As for Crockett, after 3 days in the Alcatraz infirmary, Dr. McKay reported he needed more specialized treatment and was showing strong psychological instability. The report concluded, inmate shows signs of panic, insomnia, frequently touching the injured area. Prison management didn't want to keep him longer, as Crockett's presence could fuel more racial tension. On November 12, 1959, the transfer order was signed. Orville, heavy. Crockett was moved from Alcatraz to USP Leavenworth as soon as he was discharged. One escort guard said, he didn't look at anyone, just covered his face. No longer the aggressive guy who arrived. 3 weeks after the attack, as Crockett left Alcatraz on the prison boat, many inmates watched from the small windows of C Block. No one waved, no one wished him anything, but everyone understood the order of the rock had changed, and Bumpy Johnson, from the cold D Block, was the one who made it happen. D Block at Alcatraz, the hole, every inmate who ever went in said the same thing. A few days and your mind starts to bend. 30 days is enough to turn a man into an empty shell. But on the afternoon of October 24, 1959, when Bumpy Johnson was brought to cell 17, D Block didn't get the reaction it usually got from other inmates. Joseph Hart, the guard who escorted him that day, wrote in his report, he walked into D Block like he was entering a familiar room, just stepped in, let the thick iron door close behind him without showing any sign of fear. Life in the hole had nothing but a thin mattress, a cold steel toilet, one basic meal slid through the slot, and 23 hours and 30 minutes a day in near total darkness. Other inmates usually said that by day 3, they started talking to themselves or imaginary figures, but Bumpy Johnson didn't. Guards noted he slept regularly, ate every meal, and rarely made any noise. He often stood under the small light slit in the morning, eyes closed for about 10 minutes, as if steadying his breathing instead of stressing over being locked in darkness. That calm drew attention, even confusion, from many guards watching him. One named Walter Briggs later said, "It wasn't resignation, it was the calm of someone used to waiting." He wasn't afraid of that place. Throughout the 30 days, he hardly spoke to anyone. An inmate in the next cell tried whispering through the vent, but Bumpy answered only once. "Save your strength. No need to waste words." To many, that was a sign of isolation, but for Bumpy, silence was a choice, not punishment. He had lived a lifetime with forced silences, in secret meetings, in jobs requiring observation, and in long Harlem nights, where one wrong word at the wrong time meant death. To him, the whole wasn't torture, it was just another version of the silences he knew too well. While he was locked in darkness, his name spread through the prison, brighter than any light in the cell house. From A block to the lower yard, the story of the 2 slashes in 3 seconds grew with every telling. Some said he moved so fast the guards didn't see. Some swore his shank was thin as a needle, and he'd kept it on him for over a month, waiting for the right moment. But the common thread in every story was awe. Black inmates saw him as the one who stood up for all of them against prolonged humiliation. Latin inmates quietly told each other that the old Harlem man had changed the power order of the rock with just 2 slashes. And the extreme white inmates, the ones who had cheered Crockett, suddenly appeared less, spoke softer, and never mentioned the name that had taken Crockett's right eye. Interestingly, even the guards talked about it. One on night shift wrote, "I don't know if he thinks about the attack, but one thing I know for sure, he has no regrets." That was what all the guards agreed on. Bumpy Johnson showed no remorse, fear, or attempt to justify. He just waited. 30 days later, when the door of cell 17 opened and light from the corridor flooded in, Bumpy stepped out, looking exactly as he had stepped in, slow, straight-backed, and calm to the point no one could guess what he had just been through. And that's why many guards later said the same thing. The hole didn't change him. It only made his legend stronger. When the D-block door opened on the morning of November 23, 1959, and Bumpy Johnson stepped back into general population, everything on the rock had changed. There was no cheering, no noise, just a strange silence spreading through the corridors. But anyone close that day felt it clearly. Alcatraz had just taken back a man unlike any other inmate. Marcus Williams recalled, "He walked by, and the whole block seemed to hold its breath. No one dared test him anymore." Before the Crockett incident, many white inmates saw messing with black inmates as natural as lunch or count. After it, they changed attitude almost overnight. Those who used to call black inmates boy suddenly bowed their heads to avoid their eyes. Those who deliberately walked past black tables in the mess hall to start trouble now chose other routes. No one forced them. The fear changed behavior faster than any rule. The Latin inmates, always caught between the 2 power blocks in prison, stayed especially cautious. They didn't get too close to him, but every time they saw him pass, they nodded in a form of silent respect. Javier Ortiz, who had been threatened multiple times by white extremist groups, said, "After that, they didn't dare touch us anymore. Just seeing Mr. Johnson standing in the yard made them back off." But the deepest change was within the black inmate community. For them, October 23rd wasn't just an attack. It was the first time in years someone dared stand up against public humiliation in front of the whole yard, and not just for himself. They saw Bumpy as their protector in a way the guards never were. Many younger ones tried to stand near him in the yard, not because they needed protection, but because they wanted to be part of that new aura. Some even secretly slipped him leftover pieces of cake from their trays as a way to show gratitude. And then, as in any place holding over 200 men compressed by violence and pressure, the story began to grow. At first, it was just Bumpy hit him in a few seconds. Then it became 2 slashes in exactly 2 seconds, not 1/100th of a second extra. Some said his shank was thin as a surgical needle. Others said he hid it in his shirt for 3 weeks as part of the plan. There were even rumors that Bumpy stood still for nearly a minute after the attack, not blinking once, while Crockett screamed on the floor. A neutral white inmate, Paul Beckett, said no one could tell what was real anymore, but everyone agreed on one thing. Don't mess with him. That legend spread like wildfire. In the yard, inmates whispered as he passed. In the mess hall, people changed seats to avoid sitting near the white extremist group. In the showers, the guys who used to puff their chests now went dead quiet whenever a black man walked in. Alcatraz, a place with unwritten gang and racial rules, suddenly had a new rule. Don't touch anyone when Bumpy Johnson is nearby. The guards noticed the change too. One wrote in a report, just him stepping into the room, the troublemakers automatically shut up. What surprised many guards most wasn't the fear Bumpy planted in the inmates, but that he didn't exploit it. He didn't start a new gang, didn't give orders, didn't demand protection money. He just returned to his usual routine. Reading, eating, going to the yard, talking with a few close people. But that very indifference made him more fearsome. A man who doesn't want power is sometimes the one who truly holds it. Marcus Williams described it. He didn't need to show off. His reputation worked for him. For many months after leaving Dublock, no major racial incidents occurred. The White Knights group, once known for causing trouble, practically vanished from the yard. That calm led many inmates to believe Alcatraz had entered a new era, an era where a 54-year-old man from Harlem, neither big nor loud, could completely change how hundreds of prisoners behaved with just 2 slashes in 3 seconds. And as Marcus Williams said years later, he didn't need to say anything. We all understood. After Crockett, no one dared test him again. While Bumpy Johnson's name spread across Alcatraz like a new symbol in the island's infirmary, Orville heavy, Crockett went through the darkest days of his life. After the October 23, 1959 attack, he was rushed to emergency care soaked in blood, his face nearly torn in 2 by the 2 slashes. Dr. Harold McKay, who handled the case directly, wrote briefly in his report, right eye completely destroyed. Bumpy's second slash cut through the eyelid and collapsed the entire eyeball structure, leaving an empty socket. The first slash tore the left cheekbone, creating a long scar reaching near the ear. After bandaging and over 100 stitches, Crockett woke with one side of his face heavy as stone, and his right eye tightly wrapped. But the heaviest thing wasn't the bandages, it was fear. Infirmary staff noted he kept turning his face away whenever they brought a mirror to check his left eye. A nurse wrote, "He wouldn't look in the mirror," he said. "Don't let me see my face." A lifetime built on aggression, but now just thinking about his new appearance was enough to make him tremble. In the days that followed, he barely spoke, didn't growl, didn't keep the menacing demeanor that once made him feared. An inmate working in the infirmary recalled he lay still, touching the scar every few minutes, as if to make sure it hadn't disappeared. For Crockett, the cruel truth was that he hadn't just lost an eye, he had lost the very thing that let him exist in the prison world, power. On November 12, 1959, Alcatraz administration signed the order transferring Crockett to USP Leavenworth. They knew keeping him would only increase racial tension and spark more violence. He left the island on the morning prison boat, saying nothing to the escort guards. The one who took him said he covered his face the whole trip. By the time he reached Leavenworth, his reputation had arrived ahead of him. In the federal prison system, news travels fast, especially stories involving racial extremists. At Leavenworth, inmates whispered the same thing. "That's the guy who got his eye slashed out at Alcatraz." A neutral white inmate, Robert Haynes, recalled in 1975, "Just mention Alcatraz, and he'd immediately touch the scar, like a reflex." The ones who once revered him as the supreme white symbol now wanted nothing to do with him. In the prison world, failing in front of hundreds is a sentence worse than solitary, and failing, extinguished by someone he once despised, a black man, was something no one forgave. Crockett tried to reclaim his place in the yard, but people avoided him. No one wanted to walk with a man carrying shame on his face. The white extremist group at Leavenworth practically banned him. Latin inmates smirked as he passed, and black inmates simply didn't care. He was no longer a threat. He was just the shadow of a story they had heard too many times. He became quiet, withdrawing into the yard, as if the open space were an invisible cage bigger than any solitary cell. An old Leavenworth guard said, "I used to see him loud in Atlanta. Here, he didn't dare look at anyone." The rest of Crockett's prison life passed like that. No power, no followers, no respectful glances, just a long scar, and the emptiness where an eye once was. Bumpy Johnson's rise and Crockett's fall happened at the same moment, in the same 3 seconds, in the same Alcatraz dining hall. One became a legend, the other vanished under the shadow of his own failure. And in the federal prison system, no one spoke of Crockett as a leader anymore, only as the man who picked the wrong opponent. Many prison legends are born from rumors, but the incident on October 23, 1959, at Alcatraz was different. It spread not because of imagination, but because of those who saw it with their own eyes, those who carried the story when transferred, and those who heard it from direct sources. Just months after the event, Bumpy Johnson's name had escaped the rock, reaching every federal facility as if carried by the wind. By the end of 1959, 6 inmates from Alcatraz were transferred to USP Atlanta. In their first week there, the Atlanta yard already knew about the slashing that blinded a guy in seconds. An Atlanta inmate recalled in 1963, "We heard the story before we even saw the new guys. People said there was an old man at Alcatraz who slashed a racist blind just because he messed with a young black guy." At Lewisburg, the story appeared in February 1960. A guard later wrote, "I heard 2 inmates talking about how Alcatraz had produced someone the whole racist crowd should fear." And at McNeil Island, the federal prison in Washington, the story arrived in the summer of 1960. According to an inmate transferred from Alcatraz, "I just mentioned the name Bumpy, and the whole white group went dead quiet. Like ripples from a center, information about Crockett's eye slashing became a living legend, and at its core were 3 words most inmates mentioned. Sit down, boy." The phrase Crockett had arrogantly shouted in front of dozens in the lower yard became a forbidden term in the prison world after 1960. Many said no one dared use it anymore, not just for fear of being seen as racist, but because it was tied to the image of a man losing an eye in 3 seconds. A white inmate at Leavenworth recalled, after 1960, no one dared say that to a black guy. Just hearing it brought silence to the room. People knew what that phrase led to at Alcatraz. Meanwhile, Bumpy's image shifted from an older inmate to a symbol of resistance against prison racism, a man who did what the system never did, protect the weaker from racial violence. Black inmates in many places began seeing him as an inspiring figure, even without meeting him. One at USP Atlanta said, "He didn't just slash Crockett, he slashed all the humiliation racists had caused for years." But the story didn't spread only through rumors, it lived on through those directly involved. Robert Jackson, the young man Crockett threatened the day before the attack, was one of the few who told the story with gratitude rather than excitement. He told fellow inmates, nurses and people he knew after release, "If Mr. Johnson hadn't stood up that day, I don't know if I would have made it through those years." Jackson didn't praise violence, he praised courage, perfect timing, and the fact that in a brutal place like Alcatraz, someone was willing to face death rather than let a small young man be crushed. Those tellings kept the story's deeper meaning alive, not just as bloodshed. Gradually, a phrase began appearing in many prisons on both black and white sides: "Never insult Bumpy Johnson." It wasn't a threat, it was a reminder that some lines must not be crossed, lines of dignity, community, and basic respect. In some places, it became a catchphrase whenever someone tried to go too far. An inmate at McNeil recalled, "I once heard a guy about to insult a black man. Another pulled him back and said, 'You want to end up like Crockett.'" In a world where official rules meant less than unwritten ones, legends like that shaped order. And from 1960 onward, no one could deny that the most prominent legend in the federal prison system, from Atlanta to Lewisburg, from McNeil to Leavenworth, was the story of the 54-year-old man at Alcatraz, who with 2 slashes in 3 seconds changed how thousands of inmates treated each other. Bumpy Johnson didn't leave Alcatraz right away, but his name had left the island long before, by a faster route than any transfer, the accounts of those who knew they had just witnessed a legend being born. In 1963, after 10 years on the inescapable island, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walked out of the gates of federal prison in Atlanta, where he was transferred in his final months and returned to Harlem, the place where he had built his reputation over 3 decades earlier. Harlem, then, was no longer the Harlem of the 1940s or 1950s. Civil rights movements were rising, divisions within the black community grew more complex, and new generation gangs were starting to take over streets once ruled by old legends. But though the landscape had changed, one thing remained: Harlem's respect for Bumpy Johnson. The day he returned, there was no celebration, no fanfare, just low nods, knowing looks, and whispers. "He's back." In Harlem, you don't need noise to show respect. Silence is sometimes the most formal greeting. Bumpy quickly returned to the activities he once controlled: underground gambling, number spots, protection rackets. But what people remembered about him wasn't those activities, it was how he treated the community. Many families said he always sent money when they were in trouble, covered medical bills for the sick, or stepped in to protect the vulnerable from troublemakers in the neighborhood. An elderly woman on 139th Street said, "Mr. Johnson had crimes, but he wasn't cruel." Harlem knew that. Those who had been transferred with Bumpy, or had been at Alcatraz during his years, there also came to Harlem to see him. Few words, no ceremony, just short meetings to say thank you. One recalled walking from Brooklyn to Harlem just to tell Bumpy, "I owe you my life. Without you, Jackson wouldn't have been the only one he assaulted." In 1965, Marcus Williams, the one who witnessed the entire Crockett incident in the dining hall, sent him a 3-page letter. One line in it was repeated by many later. "You saved a lot of lives, not just Jackson's." All us black guys at Alcatraz understood that. The letter didn't talk about gangs or violence. It talked about respect among men forced into the harshest place in America. Even back in his old life, Bumpy Johnson kept the same calm he had in the hole. He spoke less than before, thought more, reacted slowly, but in that slowness, people saw the sharpness of someone who had faced the entire prison system and survived. A friend of his said, "He walked like he was hearing sounds no one else could." That was the calm of someone who had seen the worst cruelty of men in the dark. That calm lasted until 1968, when Bumpy collapsed from a heart attack at Wells' restaurant one summer evening. He passed quickly, without prolonged pain, but his death left a huge void in the Harlem community. People said that on the night he died, many Harlem streets were quieter than usual, as if the whole neighborhood was bowing to a final chapter written in respect rather than fear. Legacy, the smile and the lost eye. After 1968, the story of the confrontation between Bumpy Johnson and Orville Heavy, Crockett never faded. It became part of prison oral culture, Harlem culture, and the belief among those who think respect sometimes has to be defended with something more costly than words. Crockett lived nearly 3 more decades after being transferred to USP Leavenworth, but he never recovered from that humiliation. He died in 1987 in Texas, still carrying the long scar on his face as an unfading mark of those fateful 3 seconds at Alcatraz. People said that until his final days, every time he looked in the mirror, he would still raise his hand to touch that rough scar, as if hoping it would disappear. But the scar didn't disappear, and neither did his memory of Bumpy Johnson. Meanwhile, the life of Robert Jackson, the young man Crockett threatened the day before the attack, went the opposite way. After release in 1962, Jackson lived quietly. But he carried one thing with him for over 30 years, a short newspaper clipping about Bumpy Johnson's death in 1968. When Jackson died in 1997, his family found that clipping in his wallet, along with a small handwritten note, "He saved me. He taught me that sometimes justice isn't words." R.J. 1962. For Jackson, that attack wasn't just violence. It was salvation, and for thousands of inmates in the federal system, after 1959, that incident was a lesson. Some saw it as proof of survival strategy, don't get backed into a corner. Others saw it as a moral lesson, don't insult others just because of skin color. But most drew the same conclusion. There are people you don't test. The prison world, brutal, savage, full of unwritten laws, rarely has heroes. But the Crockett incident made many believe that sometimes, very rarely, there is a moment when a man stands up for what is right. Not for a gang, not for personal revenge, but because some lines cannot be let others cross. And in this story, that moment began with an arrogant sentence, "Sit down, boy," and ended with a slight smile from a 54-year-old man before delivering 2 slashes that changed the power balance of an entire prison. A story told and retold, not for the blood, but for the way it reversed the strong and the weak. Every story has its conclusion. And for the legend of Alcatraz in 1959, that conclusion has been passed down for decades in the yards, mess halls, and cells of the federal prison system. He told Bumpy, "Sit down, boy." Bumpy smiled. 2 days later, he lost an eye. And Alcatraz never forgot. If you like these dramatic retellings of true crime history, please subscribe to follow so you don't miss the next parts. Thank you for reading. See you in the next stories.